Okay, today we're going to talk about fact or fiction. I apologize for my voice a little bit. Uh, when they did surgery on me, I don't know if it's the way. Usually, when I have surgery like that, I get scratched by the trach tube that they put down, and the way I'm sort of constructed, I end up coughing a lot. So I've been coughing incessantly for days, and it does affect my voice. This was a difficult week to kind of glean things that happened. So I'm just going to kind of do a scattershot approach. And at the end, I'm going to do something a little bit different to finish up, which I think would be a hopeful message. I'm just going to read a book of the Bible. And I'm going to try not to make any commentary on it. I'll unpack parts of it in the future. I've been working up some things on that. We talk each week about the convergence of events, and again, this was another week where a lot of things happened that in our culture, in our politics, in religion, in the geopolitics in the Middle East, and in the world, really reflect a world that is in a bit of chaos, and it becomes very difficult to. Did I lose my feed? Okay. Okay. So it becomes very difficult to determine whether it's fact or fiction. It has become a very divisive time, but this is what Jesus told us would happen. Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth. I tell you, nay. I came to divide. And boy, do I ever see that in the evangelical church. I see a lot of, frankly, slanderous accusations being made against ministries that are totally baseless. Even myself, who this week was accused of being Hebrew roots. Now, folks, that is so preposterous, libelous, slanderous. I don't care what if you're saying that, you are lying. You could not have listened to me for 5 years, 20 years, as a lot of people in this church have, and even come up with anything resembling that kind of a charge. And if you're making that charge, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I could say a lot more, but the people who do this know who they are. It's a ridiculous notion, and frankly, I resent it. So, speaking of division, I don't even have a clip of it. You saw the president's State of the Union address. I'm sure some of you did. I watched parts of it just because I knew that it was going to be wild. It's like there's I did watch MSNBC the next day to watch people analyze the president's speech. I then turned over and read what this president said and watched it, and they were, talk about fact or fiction. It was difficult to determine, were they watching this? For example, in his speech, the president said that a third of the women are sexually assaulted or raped immigrating through Mexico to the border. And immediately the fact checkers on the left all said, that's a lie, he's lying. So the truth of the matter is, Doctors Without Borders, which is a left-wing group, right? They did a survey, and their number they came up with was 31% of women. The president said a third. Now, there are many other studies that have shown that the number is maybe 60 to 80%, but excuse me, I saw an article in just the Washington Post this morning saying, I think it was an editorial, the president's making too much of this human trafficking thing. it's shock. I don't even know. It's hard for me to even form the words to tell you how disgusted I am with how people come up with these conclusions. They act like human trafficking is no big deal because Donald Trump said something about it. Okay, take him out of the equation. Human trafficking is a big deal. Toledo, Ohio is considered to be one of the epicenters of human trafficking because of the convergence of the interstates up there, the Turnpike and Interstate 75. It's a huge problem. There are arrests of dozens of people all the time. Last week at the Super Bowl, there were, 4 dozen or so arrests of people that were engaged in human trafficking at this big event each year where it's a major problem. And I don't know where people look. I have low expectations of non-believers. I really do. But even among non-believers, people used to have a soul. And there's a darkness that's come over everything. There's statistics out there that show that the growth in practicing witches in the United States has grown tremendously. This week on interviews, post-Super Bowl interviews with Tom Brady, the quarterback of the New England Patriots. Now listen, he went to Michigan, so I have real problems with him anyway. But he was saying that, hey, my wife gives me these healing stones and protection stones, and she's a witch. She's a good witch. She calls herself a witch. And everybody's just laughing about it. This is the way this has permeated the world and culture, and unfortunately it permeates the church. So you saw when the president said he wanted to stop late-term abortions, all those women in white on the Democratic side of the aisle just sat there on their hands. There is a spiritual evil battle in play right now. And it manifests itself on this abortion issue. So the governor of New York, New York, he says, well, I'm a Catholic, but, I have to be pro-choice. And the cardinal in charge of his diocese in New York, Timothy Dolan, says, well, we really can't make it a political issue by excommunicating him. And so the states, so what's happened, and I think I've explained this before, there's a concern on the left, on the pro-abortion side, that the Supreme Court will overturn Roe versus Wade. So what they have done is what anybody who's followed this and understands how the legal thing works, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, it doesn't mean that abortion is banned. And what it will do is it will end up going back to each individual state. And so that's why there's this push to put in place all of these pro-abortion and even pro-infanticide, I would say, laws in place. The Gosnell laws. By the way, go get the Gosnell DVD or rent it. It might be on Netflix or Amazon Prime. It's really taken from transcripts of the trial. And it's not bloody or anything like that. But it's shocking what this guy did and the cavalier attitude that he had. And then you see state legislatures cheering when they put in place laws, as the president said, that would allow babies at the very last moment to be terminated. While the woman is dilating, while the woman is delivering, kill the baby. And even suggesting if the child is born, about a decision will be made whether to resuscitate it or make it comfortable. This is an evil that's hard to describe. So there's this huge split. I think New Mexico actually just put in place a law. This is the governor of New Mexico, prohibited her National Guard from going down to the border to prevent illegal immigration across the Mexico-New Mexico border. And New Mexico now has put in place a law that's even more liberal than New York's. Vermont's trying the same thing. Virginia, fortunately, it failed there, but they're going to keep trying. And so there's this big, and this is from the Wall Street Journal. There's a huge split. There was a big survey on this in the Washington Post also the other day. And there's whatever division there is in politics in our country tracks exactly what's going on here with abortion. There are many states, usually in the interior part, Ohio, Iowa, they're trying to put in these heartbeat laws. And we are all hopeful that eventually one of these cases will make its way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court will overturn it. Now, listen, I'm not that optimistic. And this week we had a law that was put in place down in Louisiana. They appealed it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided, now they haven't decided the case yet, but they issued a 5-4 decision that said, okay, the law can't be implemented until we decide, and Chief Justice Roberts voted with the 4 liberal justices to stop the Louisiana law from being put in place. And frankly, I think Kavanaugh dissented from that decision, and I'm not so sure that his dissent gives much encouragement that Roe versus Wade is going to be overturned. Maybe have a better shot if Justice Ginsburg, I hear she showed up at a thing in New York. Of course, nobody took any pictures of her. And we'll see if she comes back to the bench when they start hearings again. But if she resigns, there was a statement that she issued that she's not going to resign until after the 2020 election, hoping that President Trump or someone else would not be there to appoint a conservative successor to her. But this is a huge issue. Just some other things that technology, things continue to develop. This is from the Wall Street Journal, I think yesterday. One world, 2 internets. Even in that, the world is being divided. 5G technology is being put in place. It will be very intrusive. Now, I'm not a fan of the National Enquirer, but I had to note the irony that the chief executive and richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, is upset with the National Enquirer for invading his privacy. The Amazon that tracks everything that I do, that constantly pushes ads in my face if I happen to look for something on Amazon. For weeks, I keep seeing the same thing. And so now Bezos says, well, we got to really respect people's privacy. You big, rich, fat, rich hypocrite. Really? Now, I'm not for extortion or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But I just think it's the perfect definition of irony, what's happening. And of course, now everybody's all over it because why? Well, because President Trump is friends with the head of the National Enquirer, and therefore this must be a conspiracy that Donald Trump is trying to destroy Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos sent naked pictures of himself to people, or a person, and got caught. Nobody did that except Jeff Bezos. But Donald Trump is, I guess, the epitome of evil and everything evil. And yet he speaks against late-term abortion, and a whole group of congresswomen dressed in white sit there and look like they're, I don't know, sucking on lemons or something. This technology is going to change things. This article yesterday from the New York Times, where robots will soon rule. And what they're saying is that there are a lot of cities where a lot of jobs are at risk as technology develops. Now, I played clips from Dr. Hariri, who's a professor of history I think medieval history is his expertise, speaking at Davos a year ago, in which he said that with the coming digital economy and the changes with artificial intelligence and robots, we're going to divide into a world where people will be worthless. And we'll have to decide what are we going to do with them. And the example that he used was that in medieval times, if you could zoom in on the lower, the chart down on the lower corner, left-hand corner of that page if you can, and we'll have to decide what we're going to do with them. In medieval times, a serf could actually provide some sort of service to the lord of the manor, whether it was, cutting the hedge or whatever. But soon we will have people who will have no functional value to society. And so what the New York Times or Wall Street Journal did was America's most disruptable cities. What cities are going to be most impacted by this change in the economy over the next several years? Number 1, Toledo, Ohio. Greensboro and High Point, North Carolina. Stockton, Lodi, California. Lakeland, Winter Haven, Florida. Las Vegas, Henderson, Paradise, Nevada. Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Louisville, Kentucky. Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and Fresno, California are the top. Average automation potential of jobs that could go the other, like Toledo, it's 49% of the jobs there could go strictly to robotics and artificial intelligence. This can we agree this will have a huge impact on society, economy, and the culture? I was just in Toledo the other day. So it's just one of those indicators that there's this convergence and acceleration of events. And as we've watched sort of the prophetic graph of things happening, what happens is for a long time, people have been watching, and this has been going on for 50 years, I think, really since 1948. And then we had the 67 war where Israel took back Jerusalem, and we had, dozens and dozens of resolutions against Israel, all these things very prophetic. And so we used to see this this increase of prophecy-related events that indicates that we're living at a very unique time in human history. But what's happened is that we're hitting the exponential phase where the graph chart is going up almost straight up in the acceleration. And you add onto that the convergence that's happening, all these things happening at the same time. Here's one that a lot of people don't talk about. The magnetic pole has shifted about 1,400 miles. And it's important because they've actually had to go and reset the GPS programs because they want the planes that leave the U.S. to fly to Europe to hit Europe and not 1,400 miles south, because everything relies on this GPS, and the pole has been shifting. Part of it's due to the sort of a disruption in the core of the Earth, and the pole shifted over time before, but this one's been pretty massive. Some people have described it as the Earth almost wobbling on its axis. Well, that sounds like Bible prophecy. The Earth's like a drunken sailor. And so this is from one of the Arab newspapers this week. I think Gulf News, magnetic North Pole's on the move, and here's what that means. At the same time this is going on, we have this disruption in Europe, Brexit. By the way, this is The Economist. And I showed you their cover for what they sort of predicted will happen in 2019. Now, I don't think they're prophets, but they look at what's going on. And this is taken right from the pages of The Economist, talking about the disaster that's going to befall because of Brexit, a no-deal Brexit. England is going to fall apart. The economy is going to fall apart. Now, there are people in England and the UK that say, I don't think it's going to be that bad. We're a huge trading partner, but we don't know. So we're down less than 50 days till this happens. But The Economist describes it as the approaching four horsemen of the apocalypse. Now, when you talk about this in Bible prophecy terms, people mock you. What I'm just saying is, here's a totally secular magazine, not religious oriented, that's using the imagery of the four horsemen of the apocalypse to describe some of the things that are going on in Europe. So mock me, if you will, but look what they're using. It's who knows what's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be smooth, but that's the imagery that they're using. The European Union is falling apart. Paris recalled their envoy to Rome because of what's going on between them, the diplomatic dispute, and the fact that Italy is not supporting what the Roman god like Emmanuel Macron wants to do. The New Statesman came out, long article, you can look it up, Broken Europe, Reformation 2.0, Why the Continent's Leaders Are on a Path to Self-Destruction. Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, talking about they're tearing the place apart. They allowed unrestricted immigration. And it goes through a lot of historical analysis. It's a good article. You can find it at the New Statesman website. I think it's not behind a paywall. But it goes through and it talks about all the problems that disunified, disruptive Europe has caused to the world. Not the least of which was the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648, the French Revolution, Napoleon rising to power as a response to the French Revolution, Napoleon being taken down, and then another revolution. And during that revolution, from the late 1700s to about the mid 1800s, over 300,000 people in France were beheaded by the progressives. Are we going to see a repeat of that? Well, history shows us it's happened, not in our lifetimes, but close enough that we ought to be concerned. And so Europe's kind of breaking apart. Don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. Germany and France are trying to keep everything together. Great article at the Gatestone Institute, EU Going Full Orwell by Judith Bergman. She wrote it this week, talking about the code of conduct that they've put in place in Europe. And here's what she says about that. The code of conduct commits the social media companies, Facebook, Google, etc., to review and remove within 24 hours illegal hate speech. According to the code of conduct, when companies receive a request to remove content, they must assess the request against their rules and community guidelines and, where applicable, national laws on combating racism and xenophobia. In other words, the social media giant acts as a voluntary censor on behalf of the European Union. In addition to the code of conduct, the EU hosts several initiatives aimed at increasing censorship. For example, the EU had a call out for research proposals on how to monitor, prevent, and counter hate speech online. It also sponsors projects that guide journalists on what to write. Under the EU's Rights, Equality, and Citizenship program, the EU has financed the publication of a handbook with guidelines for journalists on how to write about migrants and migration. The guidelines form part of the Respect Words project, also financed by the EU, which aims to promote quality reporting on migrants and ethnic and religious minorities as an indispensable tool in the fight against hate. The handbook guidelines state, among other things, that journalists should, quote, take care not to further stigmatize terms such as Muslim or Islam by associating them with particular acts. Don't allow extremist claims about acting in the name of Islam to stand unchallenged. Highlight the diversity of Muslim communities. Where it is necessary and newsworthy to report hateful comments against Muslims, mediate the information, challenge any false premise on which such comments rely. In other words, Judith Bergman says, the guidelines ask journalists to disinform the public. How then should one logically respond to the EU-sponsored Action Plan Against Discrimination. And the problem with this is Google, Facebook, all these other companies are signing on. They have to do business in those places. But they're not going to distinguish between European users and American users, where we have a different view of free speech. And so what happens? The governments of Europe outsource fascism through the corporations enforce it, and freedoms are restricted. It includes freedoms here. And you see Twitter doing it to people here, the people they banned, Facebook here. All of my prophecy updates are in restricted mode on Facebook or on YouTube. So if you search, if you have restricted mode on your browser, on YouTube, to filter out adult content, violent and adult pornographic content, it will filter out the prophecy update. This happens to dozens of Prager University videos. It's shocking. Alan Dershowitz does a thing on the creation of the Jewish state of Israel, and it's restricted on YouTube. It's happening. It's already happening. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to our videos. But this is the world that we live in. The protests, I mean, this is some of the things that are going on with protests, the Yellow Vest protest in Paris yesterday. And to be honest with you, some of the videos I can't show you because they're so graphic. People having their hands blown off by these stun grenades that the police are shooting at protesters. I mean literally their hand shredded and blown off. I have another video, I didn't have time to edit it for this morning, where a person was standing by a light post on a street in Paris filming everything, and one of these police went up with a nightstick and just hit his hand as hard as he could to knock the phone that he was filming with out of his hand, and then stepped on it. This is Paris. This is the progressive left in operation. This is Emmanuel Macron's goons, frankly. They don't care about freedom. We don't care about freedom in our country. This is the thing that's happening. This is from Alliance Defending Freedom. New York says, change your beliefs or stop serving children. What's happening? So here's a lawsuit that Alliance Defending Freedom has filed against the Commissioner for the Office of Children and Family Services for the state of New York on behalf of New Hope Family Services. New Hope Family Services is one, I think, of 130 or so social service agencies that have been approved by the state of New York, and for years the state of New York has used to handle adoptions, approve them for adoptions of children. Back in October 1st, the Office of Children and Family Services wrote a letter to New Hope. And they said, listen, you're doing great work, but we've got some concerns about a couple of things. New Hope is a Christian organization. They have a statement of faith, and they're very clear that their statement of faith guides what they do in terms of adoption. So you probably know what they do. So here, 2 weeks later, a little over 2 weeks later, they get a letter from the Office of Children and Family Services saying, hey, we find out that you will not adopt children to same-sex marriage couples or single people. You want to have children adopted by a mother and father family, married family. That is now unacceptable in New York, and they are being threatened with pulling their ability to do anything with regard to adoptions. So Alliance Defending Freedom, this is New York. This is America. You cannot hold to traditional values and function in society. Folks, I'm telling you, people contact me all the time about, I'm afraid to speak out about my faith at work because I'll get fired. I'll be called a bigot, homophobe, Islamophobe, whatever. So I just keep my mouth shut. This is proof that they're doing this. They're a bunch of fascists. Look at what this letter says. OCFS hereby requests a formal written response from New Hope stating that the agency's position in regard to revising this policy to eliminate those portions that violate the above-cited regulation. Please respond within 15 days of receipt of this letter indicating specifically whether NHFS intends to revise the present policy and continue the existing adoption program, or that New Hope will not revise the policy so as to comply with the above-cited regulation. Please be aware that should the agency fail to bring the policy into compliance with the regulation, OCFS will be unable to approve continuation of New Hope's current adoption program, and New Hope will be required to submit a closeout plan for the adoption program. Because they actually believe that it's better for children to be adopted by a family with a mother and a father. That is verboten in today's political, cultural environment. And the government this is the government enforcing this on people's exercise of their religious freedom. Now, there are plenty of other agencies, by the way, that will adopt the same-sex couples. But we have to shut everyone down that doesn't agree with us, that doesn't conform to our view of way things ought to operate. And this is the Think Progress website in the center there. You see how they describe what Alliance Defending Freedom did. Alliance Defending Freedom, by the way, is a great organization. If it's one you want to support, I would highly recommend it. They do great work protecting particularly Christians in the exercise of religious liberty. But here's how Think Progress, the progressive left-wing website, describes it. Hate group files lawsuit to ensure adoption agency can discriminate against same-sex couples. This is the way the language is going today. People just throw out these accusations with no basis in fact. Here's a great one. Socialist Venezuela. This is the bridge between Colombia and Venezuela. Colombia at the bottom, Venezuela at the top. They blocked it with big containers full of concrete and that sort of thing and barricades. Why? Because U.S. aid was going to come across that bridge into Venezuela. So the Maduro government said, we're going to block this from happening. The progressive left, boy, they sure care about their people who are starving in Venezuela, don't they? And we can't even learn from that example. So this week in Congress, Ocasio-Cortez introduced the Green New Deal. And here's the announcement. Ed Markey, been endorsed by 60 people in Congress from the Democratic Party. And my understanding is it's been endorsed by at least 4 of their, 700 presidential candidates that they have. And the thing is just absolutely insane. Well, here's actually some. Let's see. Oh, there it is. This is from their website. The direct quotes. Build on FDR's second Bill of Rights by guaranteeing a job with family-sustaining wage, family and medical leave, vacations, and retirement security, high-quality education, including higher education and trade schools, clean air and water and access to nature, healthy food, high-quality health care, safe, affordable, adequate housing, economic environment free of monopolies, except the government committee that's going to control all this, and then this is the killer. Economic security for all who are unable or unwilling to work. It was, I think, the New York Times editorial page or Sunday Review section today said, wait, they missed it. Free daycare, too. They should have put free daycare in there. That's the New York Times this morning. Front page of their Sunday Review editorial opinion section. Okay? But here's what happened. The Green New Deal details were put up on Ocasio-Cortez's webpage, and then they suddenly disappeared. Here's what happened. This is from the Washington Examiner this morning. On February 5th, the Congressional Office of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted a new blog entry under energy issues detailing her new Green New Deal proposal and answering frequently asked questions. The page announcing an 8:30 a.m. launch on February 6th, the morning after the President's State of the Union, is now gone. And a top advisor suggested Friday the page that she put up on her website was actually authored by the Republicans. By the afternoon of February 7th, Ocasio-Cortez removed the document from her website without explanation, but following backlash and even ridicule over the radical plans outlined within it, including a call to, quote, eliminate emissions from cows or air travel. Cow flatulence is a big deal. It makes me want to have the biggest steak ever, every day. Eliminate emissions from cow or air travel, which would functionally ban the latter, and to provide economic security for all who are unable or unwilling to work. The document vanished just hours after Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey formally unveiled a Green New Deal resolution that so far has attracted 67 Democratic co-sponsors in the House. It's a non-binding measure that is less detailed than the now deleted frequently asked question document. That calls for a complete and speedy overhaul of the nation's energy, transportation, and farming sectors in order to eliminate carbon emissions in the coming decades. Rebuild or refurbish every building in the United States in the next 10 years. Eliminate air travel. 99% of air travel, take a train. Now, listen, if your worldview is limited to, there's a very famous cover, I think, of the New Yorker years ago showing a New Yorker's view of America. And so you have Manhattan, would take up about 3/4 of the screen. Then about 1/8 of the screen would be the Hudson River. And then another 1/8 of the screen would be New Jersey. And then the other 1/16 of the screen would be, from New Jersey to California. And this is the view that she has of the world. Because she thinks everybody takes the subway to work. And everybody has access to a train. And I better never see this gal in Europe. Well, we could start, I bet I would get $1 million in a GoFundMe to send her to Europe on a permanent vacation in a day. So this is the way it is. In England, at Portsmouth University, Peter Hitchens was supposed to speak. They have a Have Your Say page at the university, and a student put up a thing, stop Peter Hitchens being allowed to deliver a speech at the university due to homophobic comments. They looked back at columns that he had written in 2009 and 2017, the transgender zealots are destroying truth itself, which is factual. And what they did was here's his tweet, thought police alert, Portsmouth University Students Union have postponed a meeting I was due to address next Tuesday because my opinions are unacceptable. Poor old Pompey has suffered so much in defense of English freedom, and this is how it all ends. It's true. There is some good news, though, and a court in Iowa required the University of Iowa, or prevented the University of Iowa from not allowing a student organization that required religious leaders to follow their beliefs. In other words, you had to subscribe to a code of conduct, no sex outside of marriage and that type of thing. The University of Iowa initially said, that's unacceptable, that's discriminatory, you bigots, you narrow-minded people, you can't be a approved student organization on our campus. They filed suit. It's called Business Leaders in Christ was the group, and the court said this: the Constitution does not tolerate the way defendants choose to enforce the human rights policies, particularly when free speech is involved. The uneven application of any policy risks the most exacting standard of judicial scrutiny, which the defendants, the University of Iowa and the people in charge, have failed to withstand. So that's actually good news. But those decisions are few and far between. Well, last week I mentioned the Pope and how he was going, in a month or so, he's going to Morocco, Servant of Hope, and this logo that they came up with, which puts, I think they mean that to look like a cross, but it looks like Islamic swords inside the crescent. And it's very symbolic in that it shows what? I think it shows a submission by this Pope to Islam. And we saw that on display this week. So here's the logo of his visit to the United Arab Emirates, and he went to Dubai this week. Before I do that, I'm gonna step back for 1 second, because this is another example of what's going on in the church in America. This is the joint statement of the colleges and universities and seminaries that belong to the United Methodist Church in America, member presidents on the called General Conference and the subject of human sexuality. And this is what the universities, the United Methodist universities, are telling the General Conference of the United Methodist Church that they need to do. We call upon the leaders of the United Methodist Church at this 2019 called General Conference to honor the past and current practices of inclusion by amending their policies and practices to affirm full inclusion in the life and ministry of the United Methodist Church of all persons regardless of their race, ethnicity, creed, national origin, gender identity / expression, or sexual orientation. If you're in United Methodist Church, you really need to get out. There's a local church that's leaving the United Methodist Church that we've been in contact with. This is a very difficult decision because they invest all their money in buildings over the years, but because they're part of the United Methodist denomination, they have a thing called a deed of trust, which means that if they ever leave the denomination, the building and land and everything that local church is invested in for 50, 60, 70 years reverts to the United Methodist denomination. It's some of the most heavy-handed stuff that you can imagine. And so it's an economic weapon to keep people within the denomination, even when the denomination is doing this nonsense. Barna has a new report out. It's called Reviving Evangelism. And just one of the studies, it says down here in the lower, next to last one, about generational differences on faith sharing. And the question was, or the statement was, it is wrong to share one's personal beliefs with someone of a different faith in hopes that they will one day share the same faith. In other words, evangelism. So among millennials, 47% agree with that statement. It's wrong to share your faith. Generation X, 27%, boomers, 19%, and elders, 20%. I find all the numbers shocking. But this is the state of the church. How have we reached this point? Maybe we've reached this point because there's just not much of a faith left worth sharing in a lot of churches anymore. It's a social club. I asked somebody once who went to a mega church. I said, what's your pastor talk about? 5 steps about how to be a better husband, 5 steps to be a better worker at my job, 10 things to do to have better friendships with people in the community. I'm like, do you talk about Bible prophecy? Does he talk about the gospel or anything? And they're like, no, not really. And so if that's what you're getting each week, why share that, right? And we've dumbed everybody down. We're getting what we deserve. So anyway, so the Pope is doing this thing in Dubai this week. He's going to go to Morocco. This was all over the press in the Arab world. This was the first ever. This is significant. Now, some people say it's not a big deal. Other people say, it's the end of the world big deal. I think it's a really big deal. Because we know that these religions are going to come together. And this Pope he's a leftist more than he is a Catholic. Even a lot of Catholics are concerned about that. So his religion is leftism. He uses Catholicism as kind of a fake out mask, a costume that he wears to fake people out, to make him think he's a Christian. He's a leftist, progressive socialist. You have to keep that in mind. And so this thing, and I've often said, we don't know exactly what the one world religion that is prophesied will look like exactly. We don't know exactly who's going to head that up, how it's going to come together. But my personal opinion is that this red-green alliance that we see, Islam being the green, red being communist socialist, and now we can add in the environmental thing with that on the other green. So it'd be green, red, green, and really green alliance. And I think this is all part of it. And so all over the Arab press, everywhere you look, first ever visit by a pope of the Roman Catholic Church to the Arabian Peninsula in history. Now, Pope's never been there, but there have been plenty of Christians there over time. Apostles went through there. And so all of these pictures as he met with the head of the United Arab Emirates, and then this Imam Tayyib, who is the head of Al-Azhar University in Egypt. It's the leading Sunni theological institution on planet Earth. If you remember Al-Azhar, that is where Obama went and gave his speech on June 4th, 2009, one of the most important, if not the most important speech that Obama gave in his entire presidency. And in my view, it was a capitulation to the Muslim Brotherhood, and it was the match, the fuse that started the Arab Spring. I stand by that statement. If you listen to that thing, I know it's torture, but the way he sounded like the Pope. Islam and Christianity need to get along. I love the sound of the call to prayer from my childhood in Indonesia. The Arab call to prayer, the Muslim call to prayer. And so then they had this kiss at the end. Here's a little video summary of the Pope arriving in Dubai. He first met with the leader. He was met at the airport by the dignitaries there, including the leader of Dubai. He was then taken to this grand mosque where he took a tour with this imam from Al-Azhar University. They then went to a big, here's the Emir, Sheikh, and the Imam and the Pope, and they're signing this document. Talk about it in just a moment. This big deal. I mean, I wouldn't dismiss this as not a big deal. They made a very big deal of it. So they signed it, and then, of course, at the end, the Pope was kissing the Imam, sealed with a kiss. I think it's in my video clip coming up. It was signed in triplicate, and then they had a big ceremonial thing that the Sheikh and the Imam and the Pope and somebody else signed. Well, I think this is here we go. It's very interesting to find that clip. I had to dig and dig and dig. I saw the video, I saw the photographs, but on the Vatican website, it was, there was a big long thing, and when it got to that point, it got the colored bars, oops, lost the feed. So this thing was called a document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. And this is what they've been doing all the time. Through faith in God, who has created the universe, creatures and all human beings equal on account of his mercy, believers are called to express this human fraternity by safeguarding creation and the entire universe and supporting all persons, especially the poorest and those most in need. By the way, he didn't lift this from the Green New Deal, although it sounds like it. This transcendental value, and this was drafted over the course of a year. They went back and forth through many drafts. There's some question as to whether some of the theologians high up in the Vatican ever saw the final draft. Pope says they did. They say they didn't. I don't believe anything the Pope says. So here is, for example, we who believe in God and in the final meeting with him and his judgment on the basis of our religious and moral responsibility, and through this document call upon ourselves, upon the leaders of the world as well as the architects of international policy and world economy, to work strenuously to spread the culture of tolerance and living together in peace, to intervene at the earliest opportunity to stop the shedding of innocent blood and bring an end to wars, conflicts, and environmental decay, and the moral and cultural decline that the world is presently experiencing. So, we agree. There is a cultural and moral decline in the world. It says this: freedom is the right of every person, and each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression, and action. The pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race, and language are willed by God in his wisdom. The pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race, and language are willed by God in his wisdom. Now, some people will say, well, the Pope didn't really mean that diversity of religions means that all religions are okay. But look at what the document says. The document doesn't stop with the diversity of religions. Diversity of color, sex, race, and language are also included in there. So they're trying to do what Cortez did with the sort of scrubbing the thing now that they've been called on the one world religious spirit that's behind this thing that happened. At the Arush Shiva Israel National News, a great article by Giulio Miatti, who wrote, "The Pope Kissed a Notorious Islamist Anti-Semite." And this is very true. He says this in his article: "And there is something wrong in the double standard of who is called the Pope's friend. Francis kissed an anti-Semite and an Islamist of the worst kind. The solution to Israeli terror," this is what this imam has said in the past, "lies in the proliferation of suicide attacks that spread terror into the hearts of Allah's enemies," said Imam Ahmed al-Tayyab during the Second Intifada. I'll repeat that. The solution to Israeli terror lies in the proliferation of suicide attacks that spread terror into the hearts of Allah's enemies. This is the man the Pope kissed. This is the man who talked about tolerance and peace. Do you believe him? If you do, there's a word for you. To avoid criticism, I won't say it out loud. But it begins with F and it rhymes with tool. Figure it out. It goes without saying, the article says, that the Palestinians have the right to blow up everything they want, as long as the victims are Jewish Zionists. For the Imam, the Muslims who convert to Christianity, deserve to be killed. He called them apostates. Anti-Semitism is justified by the Quran, and Jerusalem has never been Jewish. Dear Pope Francis, are you sure that it was an angel of peace and not one of death? Are you aware that violence is committed or attempted every day against Jews in Israel, and that your Egyptian friend justified it? Or that if the Jews are attacked by Muslims, that it is not violence in the name of religion, but in the name of a justified resistance? Raymond Ibrahim wrote an article back in July of 2016 talking about the two faces of Al-Azhar. When you're in Egypt and you listen to what they say, it is very different what they will say when they are somewhere else in a meeting. And yet if you point out what they say, in fact, here's from Memory Middle East Media Research Institute. I'm going to turn the sound off on this. This is the imam that the Pope kissed. This is what he said. This is a translation of what he said a number of years ago. And he's talking about apostasy. And apostasy, if it happens in Islam, if someone leaves the faith, they have to be punished. And what is the punishment? The question is from the interviewer. And he goes on and he talks about in the West you have personal rights, and we don't really recognize those in the Muslim world because Sharia doesn't allow you to have freedom like that. And he said, listen, we're more moral than you are. The problem is that Islamic civilizations are based on moral and religious values, whereas this civilization, the West, is based on personal liberties and some moral values. As I said, if an apostate has left Islam out of hatred toward it, this is a direct, accurate translation, and with the purpose of acting against it, this is considered high treason, because this is a Muslim society which has had Islam for 1,400 years and other religions for over 5,000 years. One does not have the right to, in this case, apostasy is a rebellion against society. By the way, apostasy means rebellion, departing from the faith. Talk about 2 Thessalonians 2:3 some other time. It means rebellion. That's what it means. They say apostasy is a crime. And if all jurisprudence agree with this, you could say that all jurisprudence agree, a very few dissent, but you could say that everybody agrees. More or less everybody. Yep, the four schools of law all concur that apostasy is a crime. And that an apostate should be asked to repent, and that if he does not, he should be killed. That's the man that the person quoted. Here's Linda Sarsour speaking at a mosque in Sacramento. I'm a little bit familiar with this mosque. I did a conference in Sacramento about 4 years ago. And just before I did that, the pastor of a large Assemblies of God church had gone to the mosque and had participated in their the big feast that they have, Iftar feast, Ramadan, excuse me. And this pastor had participated at this very mosque. And here's what Linda Sarsour said. It's kind of interesting. Her comments, this will be about a minute and a half. The sound's not great, but listen closely. Whoops.
Thought it was a good idea to move the American embassy to Jerusalem. And this president stood up and declared and thought it was just about words, that he has so much power that he can stand up and declare that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And since he thinks it's as easy as words, I will declare to all of you here today in Sacramento that Jerusalem is and always will be the capital of Palestine. My parents couldn't afford to send 7 children to Islamic school.
Well,
and on the weekend,
what I'm going to do is because the sound's not that great, I'll give you what she actually said at this speech in Sacramento. She said, my parents couldn't afford to send me to Islamic school growing up, and I never really learned what I now know is that Muhammad was a great human rights activist. Okay. This is and she talked about environment, free health care, and Muhammad was a great human rights activist. Also in Dubai this week, down the road, not in Dubai, and Pope was in Abu Dhabi. He actually did a mass there, the first mass by a pope on the Arabian Peninsula. Listen, I think this was all a big show. I don't believe anything was solved or resolved. And then down the road in Dubai, they had the World Government Summit. All these people came together. Here's the president of Estonia talking about technology and how Estonia has been working on technology for their citizens for 20 years. Just this, I think, kind of fits into one world religion, and then we have this, just down the road, we have this economic system, digital economic system. Here's what he says. Whoops.
Fundamentals that in our view are the
Okay, now we start.
Out three fundamentals that in our view are the most helps in building a functioning digital society. First step is to have a unique ID number for every person. This is important because we need something to link together all of the data concerning one person. Second step, it is to provide a strong digital identity. This is one of the cornerstones of digital economy. Every digital service with a legal outcome needs a secure digital identity. In Estonia, we started with ID cards, which were launched in 2001. Today, we have added an option of using a mobile ID and an app-based smart ID. All of them provides a safe and secure method for authentication. With trustworthy and secure digital identities, you can build many digital services.
Okay, and that's Estonia. And they've hosted, I've played clips of them in the past, they host these big digital conferences for Europe and the world. They're sort of a model. They're a small, kind of homogenous society, ethnically and religiously. So it's able for them to implement these a little bit more easily. And I think Estonia is part of when Macron has his 10-nation group that he wants to put into a military defense group, Estonia is always included as part of that. So let's talk just briefly about the Middle East. I have to tell you, fact or fiction, very difficult to figure out what's going on in the Middle East. There's tremendous amounts of propaganda, so I try to sort through this. Syria is very confusing. There are literally hundreds of groups, and they shift alliances. So things are, look, the major players in Syria right now are the Syrian government to a little bit of extent, but mainly Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and more so Russia and Iran. There are reports of some conflicts. I mentioned this a lot last week. There's some tension between Russia and Iran. There's supposed to be a big meeting on, I think this week on the 14th in Sochi, Russia, with Turkey, Iran, and Iran leaders to discuss Syria and how they're going to get along. And exactly how this is, the U.S. withdrawal, how this is going to play into it. Here's one issue on conflict, though, that is coming up. This is from Gulf News. Syrian war, disputed waters hinder solutions for hydrocarbon resources. And you'll note, see this block here, Turkey and Lebanon and Syria have these claims to offshore gas. Israel's Leviathan field is here. It's coming online. They're going to there's plans to do a pipeline up through Greece into Europe. Russia's not too happy about that because they really have pretty much a monopoly on gas to the European market right now. That's going to take about 5 years, but it will have a big economic impact on Russia going forward. And so there's this battle in the space of Syria because of these gas resources. And now Turkey's starting to do exploration there because of what they claim is theirs from Cyprus. Greece claims part of it. Greece is allied with Israel. And so if you think Syria is messed up, now the Mediterranean is in turmoil too as to who controls what. And now there's reports this morning. I saw a report that Russia had destroyed some bridges that Iran uses to get across the Euphrates. I haven't been able to confirm that. That was in the Jerusalem Post. I'll wait to see for further confirmation on that. But it just shows that there is this bit of a conflict or tension between Russia and Iran. Russia's come out now and said, hey, Israel, we don't want you bombing and we don't want you continuing these raids that you've made into Syria over the last couple of years. We want you to stop that. There are reports that Iran has been upset that the S-300 system has not been made operational yet by Russia. Syria says, oh, it's operational, but it never seems to be implemented when Israel does these attacks. Netanyahu goes and meets with Putin, and so there's this back and forth, and it's very complicated. Even the reports from Geopolitical Futures as to what's going to happen this year talked about how there's this anti-Iran alliance that's the yellow countries, Iraq and Iran, Lebanon are all sort of in alliance. Syria's kind of in the middle, Yemen as well. Oman, for example, they're kind of ambiguous in their relations with Iran. I don't know why they have Qatar ambiguous in its relations with Iran. There's actually a big conference that Daniel Pipe's group, Endowment for Middle East Truth, I think it's called, had a little conference this week about Qatar. Qatar has like 300,000 people. But when they talk about the most significant players in the Middle East, it's Qatar. The average Qatar citizen makes $500,000 a year from oil and gas sales. Each person. And they have a huge field in the Persian Gulf that they share with Iran. So I would put, well, I guess it does show Qatar in, I'm sorry, it is green, so it does show that it's in league with Iran. So very interesting thing. And so the question is, how close related is Iran and Russia? Here's a deputy foreign minister from interviewed on CNN talking about that relationship. This is kind of an interesting answer. This is from about 10 days ago.
Russia reiterated its satisfaction with President Trump's decision to pull U.S. forces out of Syria, saying Russia is committed to ensuring Israel's security against Iranian forces fighting on the side of the Assad government.
You're Iran's ally on the ground, aren't you, in Syria?
I wouldn't use this type of words to describe where we are with Iran. We in no way underestimate the importance of measures that would ensure very strong security of the state of Israel.
That's kind of interesting. Baghdadi survived a coup attempt. Caroline Glick has a good article. She's running for the Knesset, and one of the parties in the Israeli election. She's not really writing in the Jerusalem Post right now because of that, but she's still writing at Breitbart. Time for the U.S. to end aid to Lebanon. In fact, there was reports, I think in Debka and some of the places, that Russia's really throwing a lot of support behind Hezbollah. So Russia's playing chess. A lot of times we're playing checkers. It's a very confusing space, but ultimately I think that there's going to be some kind of, when push comes to shove, and I can't remember where I read it this week, they just say Russia's going to throw in with Iran. I think that has prophetic significance. And I think this whole gas thing that I showed you just a few moments ago plays into that whole space. Progressive assault on Israel. This is Bret Stephens in this morning's New York Times talking about how progressives attack Israel. They're against Israel, but they claim, we're just anti-Zionist. Listen, you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Israel. I don't care how you want to parse the words. Here is the Somalian congresswoman, Muslim congresswoman from Minnesota, being interviewed about Israel. This is kind of interesting what she has to say. Just listen.
Israel, because it has been a point of contention. How can America work productively towards a just and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians, in your opinion? By having an equal approach to dealing with both. Most of the things that have always been aggravating to me is that we have had a policy that makes one superior to the other. And we mask it with a conversation that's about justice and a two-state solution when you have policies that clearly prioritize one over the other. Such as? Just our relationship really with the Israeli government and the Israeli state. And so when I see Israel institute law that recognizes it as a Jewish state and does not recognize the other religions that are living in it, and we still uphold it as a democracy in the Middle East, I almost chuckle, because I know that if we see that in any other society, we would criticize it, we would call it out. We do that to Iran, we do that to any other place that sort of upholds its religion. And I see that now happening with Saudi Arabia. And so I am aggravated, truly, in those
contradictions. So she chuckles that Israel's a democracy. I laugh at what she says. It's incoherent. It shows we live, there's fact and fiction, right? We live in alternative universe, completely opposite universes. It's unbelievable, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Chuckle at this. Ori Ansbacher, 19-year-old Israeli girl, was killed in the Judean hills. Brian Schrager said this is close to where he takes a walk many days, near the Jerusalem Zoo. Now, they did arrest a person. We always talk about Bible prophecy, and we say, okay, this is going to happen and this is going to happen, but they're trigger events for things happening. And I have contended for a long time that at some point, I think Israel will say, we're done dealing with this. And you're seeing a bit of a sea change in this, because Israel in its existence, 70 years as a sovereign nation, has used the death penalty one time. Adolf Eichmann. They kidnapped him in Argentina, or Paraguay or Uruguay, and brought him back, put him on trial, and he was executed for what he did in the Holocaust. It's the only time Israel's executed anyone after a trial. There are calls all over the place in Israel right now to put the death penalty in play for the person who did this heinous crime. And this is a picture of her funeral that took place yesterday in Jerusalem, or maybe this morning. 19 years old, stabbed, and they haven't released all the details. I've heard that she was brutally raped and stabbed. At some point, Israel just says, I've had enough of this. And that's a trigger event. So we're out of time. I was going to read, look, go home, just sit down, take your Bible, and read a thing that has a message of hope. And this is how Scripture would have been read in the early church. They got these letters. The Thessalonian church, the Church of Thessalonica, got letters from Paul. And so they would have sat down, and I did this. Remember when we were meeting down there at CompuServe building? One night for my teaching update, I just read 1 Thessalonians, the way they would have read it. Now, we divided into chapter and verses, but there were no chapter divisions or verse divisions. They just would read the letter. Go read 1 and 2 Thessalonians. Read it through all the way together and see the common themes that are talked about. You'll find talking about the second coming in every chapter of 1 Thessalonians. You'll find that theme carrying on into 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and on. Very important. And it will be consistent, by the way, my view, with Matthew chapter 24. Go read Matthew chapter 24 and 25. They fit together very closely, very well. So do that as a message of hope, because listen, the only hope, we talk about this each week, the only hope for this, for what they're doing to babies in our culture, is changed hearts through the gospel of Jesus Christ. Jesus died on the cross for the sins of man. And by believing in that free gift of salvation, you will be forgiven for your sins and placed into the body of Christ. That's the gospel. Belief in the work of Jesus Christ on the cross, his death, burial, and resurrection. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It's a glorious message. It's very simple, and it is the only hope for this world. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the time. Thanks for your word. Thanks for the promises. Thanks for the blessed message of the gospel of Jesus Christ and its ability to change lives and hearts. Pray that you'll give us opportunities to share that gospel this week. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.